Hello everyone who study ethology with us. Today we have the topic general characteristics of different types of animal behavior, and this is the second part, acquired or learned behavior. And now we return to the slide where we divided the behavior of animals into main types and talk about learned behavior. And here we see some types of learned behavior, and sometimes we have these two types in general. We have already discussed this table in the previous classes, and now we will consider acquired learned behavior in more details, and what is this learned behavior, and especially acquired. The term, it is very often we hear in literature and see in books, and this behavior is one that his organism develops as a result of experience. It's the process by which an activity originates or is changed through reacting to an encountered situation. Information about these encounters in the environments will be stored in the brain, in special parts of the brain, and we will discuss about this next class about memory. In the brain of the organism is memory, and animals can use this memory information when they encounter similar situation in environment. And here we see this slide where we find differences between innate behavior and learned behavior. And here we see this based on experience, of course, modified by individual, by trial and error, effort by environment, high variation in population, capacity to learn is a product of natural selection. And some examples, of course, we find more. And here we see the 6 groups of learned behavior. First, habituation, trial and error learning, insight learning, imprinting, reasoning, and of course associative learning. We will start from habituation. What is this? Habituation is a simple form of learning, very simple, in which an animal stops responding to a stimulus or cue after a period of repeated. If animals are subjected to repeated harmless stimulus, it might gradually cease to respond or learns not to react to them. For example, just bright dogs typically sound an alarm call when a predator comes to. At first, they will give this alarm call in response to the hearing human steps, which indicates that the presence of the large and potentially hungry animal, big animal, which can to eat these little animals, these dogs. However, the bright dogs gradually become habituated to the sound of human footsteps, especially if you have the food. As they repeatedly experience the sound without anything bad happening, and even you see this animal to contact with a human who have a food for these little dogs. And it is a habituation, and here we see what it is. Organism decreases or stops its response to a repetitive stimulus that neither rewards or harms the animal, and just ignoring the stimulus, and animals can spend their time, energy more effective, just not have any stress when prey dog hormones are located near trails used by humans, giving alarm calls every time a person walks by. It's a waste of time and energy for the group, of course. And here we see the difference with some adaptation. You often hear the word adaptation, but it is not the same with the habituation. Response involving physiological adaptation take place mostly in our sense organs, whereas response involving cognitive habituation take place mostly in our brains. Special nerve centers which contact with our special organs, and it's not the same with the habituation. And here we see the new slide. Exactly, I don't mean to scare you, but it's actually harder. Not associative learning. Here we see the habituation, and one more term includes sensitization. So no associative learning, it's a habituation and sensitization. It's not the same. In habituation is a decrease in innate response to the frequently repeated stimulus, and results in a decrease in responsiveness. Sensitization is the increased, not decreased, increased reaction to a stimulus after repeated exposure, and results in an increase in responsiveness. Sometimes we find it in humans. Stimulus produce a more intense response over time, more intense. It's like when people return from the combat, they sometimes have strong reaction to loud sounds and movements, and reverse drug tolerance, of course. But we have the same situation. Such examples can be found for animals too. Here we see this like a traumatic sensitization, and here we see the example for the dog, but for all animals it can be. And here we see increased response to repeated stimulus. This is sensitization, and very often it can be traumatic. And such examples. And here we see the next kind of learning behavior is the observation learning. Is a process in which learning occurs through observing and imitating others. And here we see the kind of as this observation learning, as vacation learning. And the Canadian-American physiologist Albert Bandura was one of the first to recognize the phenomenon of observation learning, and his theory and learning by observing others, also called social learning. It's so much terms, so observation learning, social learning, and even vicarious learning. And what we have about it, it's just the part of his theory, the four processes that Bandura's research and influencing of observing learning. It's attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation, of course. And this slide just tell about all these terms. Attention. In order to learn, observers must pay attention to their environment, and these variables can include how stimulus, the model, but this all terms for humans, of course, but almost the same we can find for animals too. I just don't stop on each slide. You can just read if you want. After that, we start to discuss this article. I just leave the link to this very interesting article about how the animals observe each other. Just here we can find like a chimpanzee observing learning for his babies. So if you want to know more, I will leave the link to this scientific work article. And move to next slide, imprinting. This type of learning is very similar to imprinting, and we have already met this term, imprinting, from the previous practical. Imprinting is a simple, repeat and highly specific type of learning that occur in young age or early life stage during the development of certain animals such as birds and mammals. You know this example when the dog just have this, but not only dogs, of course. You know this Konrad Lorenz theory, and first moving objects and hostling after their hatching, and then the ghost start to follow him as if he was their mother. You know this picture from the previous, and surmising imprinting has some characteristic. Fast specific learning has a critical period. It's predominantly phase in organism life when it's highly sensitive to respond to stimuli. It's the young period of the life, first days, first hour, and initially through to be irreversible in nature, still doubt persists. Next one, associative learning. Here we see the classical conditioning reflex and operant conditioning reflexes, and we move to the, in general, what is this associative learning or conditional reflexes. Associative learning is the process by which an animal learns association between two stimuli or events. It is a form of behavioral modification involving the association of two or more events, such as between two stimuli or between a stimulus and a response. In associative learning, an animal does learn to do something new or better, and there are two categories of associative learning: classical conditioning and operant conditioning. What is this? We will start from the operant conditioning, or just instrumental conditioning, a form of associative learning in which the consequences of behavior change the probability of the behavior's occurrence. So what we have in this case, the operant conditioning is a bit different than classical conditioning in that it does not rely on an exciting stimulus-response pair. Increased whenever an organism performs a behavior or an intermediate step on the way to the complete behavior. It's given a reward or punishment. And first, the organism may perform the behavior present in a lever purely by chance, and one prominent early investigator of operant conditioning was the psychologist Skinner, you know this name, and inventor of the Skinner box. Skinner put rats in box containing a lever that would dispense food, then pushed by the rat, and the rat would initially push the lever a few times by accident and would then begin to associate pushing the lever with giving the food. Over time, the rat would push the lever more and quickly, frequently, in order to obtain the food. And even from the previous practical, I hope you know this. And here you see also call it instrumental learning, because we use this kind of instruments, and not only Skinner. Some people do experiments such way. And here we see even behavior, operant conditioned behavior is associated with the words reinforcement and punishment. So what is this? Of course, the name of the Skinner, but here we see the table. This table start from the positive and negative reinforcement. And what is this? Just negative. Here we see escape, activate, avoidance, and here the table with this kind of experiments, and there are a total of 5 these words. Positive reinforcement occur when a behavior response is rewarding, or the behavior is followed by another stimulus that is rewarding, increasing the frequency of the behavior. For example, a rat in a Skinner box has food. When it presses a lever, its rate of pressing will go up. This procedure is usually called simply reinforcement. But we have the negative reinforcement, escape, occur when a behavior or response is followed by the removal of the aversive stimulus, thereby increasing the original behavior's frequency. In the Skinner box experiment, the aversive stimulus might be a loud noise continuously inside the box. Negative reinforcement would happen when the rat presses a lever to turn off the noise. And positive reinforcement, also referred to as punishment by contingent stimulation, occur when a behavior response is followed by an aversive stimulus, example pain from a spank, and which would often result in a decrease in that behavior. Positive punishment is confined in terms, so the procedure is usually referred to as punishment. And here we see the negative punishment, like a penalty, also call it punishment by contingent withdrawal, occur when a behavioral response is followed by the removal of a stimulus and taking away a child's toy, following an underside behavior by him/her, which would result in a decrease in the undercerebral behavior. So here what we have with dogs, for example, reinforcement and punishment. Very often these terms we use when we want to do something with our animals to taught some you see this funny picture, to teach our dog something good. And here we see in a positive reinforcement, adding something the animal wants increases the likelihood that a behavior will recur, and in negative reinforcement, removing something versus increases the likelihood that a behavior will recur. And a positive punishment and negative punishment, here we see this. But in the future we will return to these pictures when we will study what we have in general, what is this reinforcement, and simply started reinforcement is consequences of a behavior that increase the likelihood of a behavior happening again, and even strengthening. But not all reinforcement adds to the animal quality of life, and here we see the positive reinforcement like R plus, and positive such as food, play, or our fun interactions. These are consequences of wow that are added to the animal's environment, and negative are the consequences that they are removed from the environment. Some examples include removing the pitch of a pitch call by walking on a loose ledge, or removing the proximity to a towel for a bird by slipping up, and all these consequences occur after behavior and serve to cause an increase in the behavior's occurrence. However, which consequences do you think will teach the animals that doing the behavior is a great choice because of the valuable outcome? If you have the dogs, of course. And some more this picture which describes this kind, positive, negative, and here new slide about new science, Edward Thorndike. You know this picture from the previous practical, but he used the box, puzzle box experiment, and put 100 cats in a puzzle box, and placed fish outside the box where it could be seen but was out of reach. In order to escape from the box to get the food, the cat had to operate a latch to release the door on the side of the box, and through a process of trial and error, the cat learned that pushing the lever, opening the door, and this animal have fish, of course, these random movements of the cat for understanding what kind of lever can help it to open the door. And what is this experiment? Thorndike founded his theory based on his experiments conducted on his cat in the puzzle box. The door of the box could be opened by pulling the strings inside the box, and fish was kept outside, and cat was tried to come out, and this experiment was repeated for several times. The wrong movements decreased, how you see, and in the end the cat was able to open the door very quickly in a simple trial. So what we have according to this theory, a theory trial and error, a learning theory. According to him, learning takes place by trial and error, and learning the learner selects a correct response out of a large number of positive ones and connects in which the appropriate stimulus, and learning by this method is called trial and error learning theory method. And here we see these types of learning occur when an organism attempts to learn by undertaking a number of alternative behaviors, trials, and makes a number of incorrect choice errors before the decided behavior is learned. And trial and error learning involves a desire to reach some sort of goal, motivation it is, and by the learner. It also involves trying a number of different behaviors, and then the correct response is finally achieved. It is rewarding for the organism reinforcement. So it's like some steps of this theory, but these steps for children and human, but almost the same for home animals, the same. And in short, factors involved in trial and error theory: theory, motive or drive. Of course, do you remember that it takes the hungry cat? This cat want to eat. Of course, the fish is very good motive, and drive is a tension state resulting from needs. Where there is a drive or motive, where is learning. In the present experiment, drive was hunger. And stimulus and goal, it's the causal factor for activity. In the present experiment, food is the stimulus, and to get the food by getting out of the goal. And response, the cat makes a number of various types of responses, like scratching, pulling, etc. And the responses which lead to the goal known as satisfying response, and the responses which do not lead to the goal is known as annoying response. And here we see one more block. The cat was confined in the box with a closed door. Chance success as a result of random movements. The cat by chance and opening the door, a selection of proper movement. Gradually, the cat selected the proper way of pulling the string out of its random movements and fixation. At last, the cat learned the proper way of opening the door and just found the food. And Thorndike's give 3 laws of learning: laws of readiness, laws affect, and law of experience. And it's primary laws, but it has the secondary laws. At first, law of readiness. This law refers that learning taking place only when the learner is ready to learn. Law of effect. This law states that learning takes place properly when it results in satisfaction and the learner derives pleasure out of it. And next one, laws of experience, to law of use and law of diffuse. Law of use, when a modifiable connection is made between a stimulation and response, that connections straight and thing being equal increase. And law of diffuse, law of disuse, when a modifiable connection is not made between a situation and response during the length of time that connection decreased. Thus, that laws of use refers to the strengthening of connections this practice, while the law of diffuse refers to the weakening of connection or foreign when the practice is discontinued. So we have the first part of the laws and the second laws. Law of multiple response. The law implies that confronted with a new situation, new area, and then organism responds in a variety of ways before arriving at the correct response. And law of attitude. Learning is guided by the attitude of the organism towards the task. The learner performs the task properly if he has developed a healthy attitude towards the task. And some of them, law of analogy and law of associative shifting. And where is the same? Similar studies have been done by Wolfgang Köhler, and these psychologists conduct experiments in which insight learning was observed by animal behavior. And there is another term, epiphany, which describes insight learning, sudden revelation, or just bringing seemingly chaotic data into summary per epiphanies. And insight learning is a type of learning or problem solving that happens all of a sudden through understanding the relationship of various parts of the problem, rather than through trial and error too, like in the previous experiments. And the skill to look at object or problems and come up with appropriate solutions through reasoning. As you know, the Kohler placed a chimpanzee named Sultan inside a cage, and Sultan grew hungry, and a push of bananas was placed just outside the cage, and Sultan was provided with one long and another short bamboo stick. And this experiments, even watched the video in a previous practical, in the first practical, I don't remember exactly. In another experiment, Kohler bunch of bananas which are out of reach of chimpanzee, and he's just to contact with these bamboo sticks to connect each with the other, and just with these sticks to chimpanzee be able to just to grab the bananas, to found the bananas. And I will leave the links in this video, and you can just watch the video like this chimpanzee do this. So we have another experiments of Skinner's works, and you know this from the previous practical, and we discussed this Skinner box yet. Operant conditioning chamber, like a Skinner box, was designed to teach us how to push a lever. I even don't stop on this slide. And here we see the negative reinforcement, and next one with the positive reinforcement. We discussed this all, and even this video links I will add to this video too, but from the previous practical you have these links. And for now, of course, and even for humans, the Skinner box and work with the visualization we use in different experiments, even for titles. And here we see the new step in learning behavior. We move in a classical conditional behavior was associated with a paired stimuli, and here we see little different phrases: and conditional stimulus, neutral stimulus, for example, unconditional response, unconditioned stimulus, and conditioned response. And who study physiology with us, all these terms, but if you don't know, I leave little dictionary in each slide. But what is a classical conditioning? A learning process in which the neutral stimulus becomes associated with the main full stimulus and acquired the capacity to elicit a similar response. And how this classical conditional refers to modification of behavior in which an original and neutral stimulus, known as the conditioned stimulus, is superior with the second stimulus that elicits a particular response, known as the unconditioned stimulus. The response, which is the unconditional stimulus elicits, is known as unconditioned response. unconditioned stimulus and unconditioned reflex. And organism exposed to repeated pairing is the central conditional stimulus, and the unconditional stimulus will often respond to the original natural stimulus as it did to the unconditional stimulus. That is, after several trials, an animal learned to associate the conditional stimulus and unconditional stimulus to unconditional reflex, and start to exhibit unconditional reflex to conditional stimulus. For the response to a conditional stimulus is called the conditioned response. Here we see these words, and even I move all these words in the corner of the slide. And this experiments Pavlov. It was the Pavlovian experiments, and created simple patterns for the animal to direct. For example, he would try to bell and then hit the animal foot. We can use not only bell, we can use different stimulus, just the light or something. When after a short wait, he would present another pair of stimuli for bell, then foot. After another wait, he presented yet another pairing, bell, then foot. And after several such pairings, Pavlov observed that happened if the bell was just alone and without any food being given. But the result was clear. The salivation and the animal wet the food. And here is in classical conditioning. In short, a response already associated with the one stimulus is associated with the second stimulus, and which it had to previous connection. And the most famous example of classical conditioning comes from the Ivan Pavlov's experiments, in which dogs were conditioned to the draw or bell. A response previously associated with the food upon hearing the sound of the bell, and even if we don't give the food, the salivation is, of course, it is a conditioned response. Here we see this no conditioned, not conditioned response, and it can be conditioned, just move to conditioned. Here we see the portrait of the Pavlov, and here we see the same after conditioning, especially, and stimul and conditioned reflex. Now the dog salivation to the bell, and to describe this pattern, Pavlov just to give two types of response: unconditioned response and conditioned. So here we see this description of these experiments, and in future we will discuss about this. In Pavlovian's experiments, every time a dog was given food, another stimulus was provided alongside the unconditional stimulus, and especially bell was ring, and at the same time the dog received the food, and this ringing the bell paired with the food is an example of the conditioning stimulus. A new stimulus delivered in a parallel with the unconditional stimulus. Over time the dogs learn to associate the ring and the bell with the food, and to respond by drooling, and eventually they would respond with drool with the bell was run. And when then the unconditioned stimulus, the food was observed, and this new formed stimulus response pair consists of a conditional stimulus and the bell ring and a conditional response drawing. And it's not only this. Here we see new one table. So we discussed the primary conditional reflex, but reflexes of this kind can be more complicated. And here we see the classical conditional reflexes, and with the different positive conditioned reflexes, and it can be primary conditioned reflex, secondary, and even more. And let's look at the secondary conditioned reflex. And in general, I will leave the links. Here we see the classical conditioning, Pavlovian reflex, and second order and higher order conditioning. It's very interesting just for understanding of this term. And here we see this in classical conditioning. Second order conditioning or higher order conditioning is a form of learning in which a stimulus is first made mindful, just we have the classical conditional reflex of the first level and organism through an initial step of learning, and then the stimulus is used as the basis for learning about some new stimulus. For example, an animal might first learn to associate a bell with a food and first order conditioning, but then learn to associate a light with the bell. It is the second order conditioning, just with here with the cat. For example, electric can opener and plus food, we have the reflex, but then we use just a cabinet door, and it's the second order stimulus plus the electric can opener, and we have the second level of or just higher order conditioning, exactly second order conditioning reflex just for opening the door. And what we have, the Pavlov's concept. These conditional reflexes are built on the basis of unconditional ones, and the building of the conditional reflex is based on the formation of the temporal connection between two cortical centers. Two centers in the cortex. If you don't know what is the cortical sense, it's better to find the video in our practical in the physiology of animals. But you know, it's just neurons in the cortex of the brain. And here we see perceiving the conditional stimulus and perceiving the unconditioned one. Is two centers, center of unconditional and conditional stimulus. Its important role in the mechanism of interaction between different cortical regions play cortica, subcortica, cortical pathways, and the dominant phenomenon, the dominant center phenomenon. And then conditioned and unconditioned stimuli are combined, and the excitation is summated, and neurocenter cells of both cortical regions, both centers, are involved in a rhythmic activity, and just like in one. And functional changes are important only for brief impression of stimuli on the cortex short-term memory. Long retention of temporal connections, just long-term memory, is based on the some molecular plastic changes taking place in the synapses and neurons. It is just a memory, different kinds of memory. And here we see the two cortical centers, just the description. And here we see this center of unconditioned and conditioned reflex, hearing the bell, and then just all two centers in the cortex, brain cortex, start work like one. And here we see the temporal connection in it. So it is almost all for today. Here we see this simple rules, like a summary rules for building of the conditioned reflexes. Like here we see the combination of conditioned and unconditioned stimulus. Conditioned stimulus should be given 1 or 5 seconds before. Unconditioned stimulus should be stronger. Conditioned stimulus should be indifferent. and it should be isolated room to prevent outside stimuli, nothing, absolutely any noise, and animals should be healthy and active state, and to include the stimuli from visceral organs, and experiments should take place in the same time every day, and several dozens of combinations should be done during the experiment. At the end of the experiment, reinforcement should be given, and to know if conditioned reflex has been formed, the law is the strength Pavlov, and here the directly depends on the intensity of the conditional reflex in the stress of the conditioned stimulus. And here we see the some classical classification of conditioned reflex. On a way of formation, we have classical conditional reflex and two conditioned reflex, and under the relation of conditional return to unconditional, natural, artificial conditioned reflex, and on biological importance: food conditioned, sexual conditioned, protective, statokinetic, homeostatic reflexes, and we will talk about all these reflexes, but after we will study the memory. Memory, it is the base to formation this, so we'll return to this slide in the future. And here we see on a degree of complexity, one more kind of reflexes more, and one more biological importance of conditional reflexes. Reflexes reaction appear at a certain time before actual unconditioned stimulus, thus preparing the organism, and conditioned reflexes help to find food, to avoid danger in the prepared time, to eliminate harmful influences, and they are base for habits. Reflexes may be applied in clinical and psychological practice. And here we can see the slide with your homework in a book and introduction to animal behavior. And here we see the pages in chapter 5 and learning and memory. So it's all, and here, like usual, we can find in description and to this video some links to the video which can help you to understand this term more in more details. So bye bye, see you next practical, and wish you all the best.